Thank you, Bill. Since we moved over to this facility, we've wanted to have get some understanding about history and kind of what we do that. So we finally were able to get our schedules right. And so we invited the lead pastor from our church here to do that. I'm going to Pastor Vance introduce himself, and it is all yours. Good afternoon. It's nice to be invited to your own church. That's nice. You all should remember that. Several of my members are here. My name is Vance. I'm privileged to be the lead pastor here. I've been the lead pastor since July of 2019. Which was just a few minutes before COVID started. This is my 6th year, but I tell people because of COVID, I think we get COVID years, like dog years. So I feel like I've been here a bit longer. But a native of Atlanta, grew up right here, born at the old Orange Hospital. Grew up on Lake Highland, and my family home went to Edgewater High School, and very nice, and University of Central Florida. Grew up working at the Palmer Feed Store, if you know the Palmers, who are members of this church, which is part of my story. I did not grow up at church, though. We went occasionally, but not enough for any of it really to stick. But about the time I graduated from UCF with the woman I was dating, we thought maybe we should find a church to get married in. And by the way, the one I was dating is the nice lady at the desk that you see when you come in, Kelly. And so in June of 1989, we visited this church, and pretty quickly we joined not long after that. And very shortly after that, experienced my call to ministry, which was quite a shock. I never thought that's where my life would go. And then I ended up becoming youth director here for a time. I left for seminary in 1991, and I've been the United Methodist pastor since, serving around Florida, as far north as Tallahassee, and as far south as Coral Springs. But really happy to be back home. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of First Church, but I'm going to try to weave it into a little bit of the history of Orlando. And I do that knowing that probably many of you know that history better than I do. So I'm not here by any means as an expert, but I do think it's interesting that the history of our community probably has had a deep effect on churches and vice versa. We've all kind of grown up together through the years. So our church has been here, and when I say here, I mean on this block and the one over there, since 1881. 1881. I want you to think about that for a minute. I could not find an 1881 calendar, but I did find an 1884 map of downtown Orlando. I know it's probably hard to see. But if you look it up, you'll find it online. It's pretty interesting. Some of the street names are the same, many have changed. But if you look at that, it shows the building with the letter C on it. That's First Methodist Church. We were built by 1884. The first lab that we were on in that location cost $200. How much do you think it would cost today? $200. The first building cost $1,000, and the population of Orlando was 1,660 people. I was doing a little bit of reading about Orlando back in the 1880s, and apparently every weekend the Cowboys would ride into town and raise heck. And that interesting, that image. It was sort of the Wild West. And so speaking of that, we started in 1880. That's our first flat-board church that was just right across the street, facing Jackson Street, rather. And just one perspective, it was 143 years ago. The first year of this church, there were only 38 states in the United States of America. Our flag looked a little different. 20 years prior to the start of this church, Florida has seceded from the Union to join the Confederacy. In 1880, President James Garfield was assassinated 200 days into office. In 1881, Chief Sitting Bull surrendered to the U.S. Army. In 1881 was the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, and the first church was here. In 1881, Booker T. Washington founded the Tuskegee Institute, later becoming a university. 1881 was about the time that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb and had it patented. It took a while for us to get one. We had a kerosene lamp for a long time. That was 15 years before Henry Ford built his first car. So you didn't come to church wondering where you get a parking space. You came wondering where you would tie up your horse. It was 22 years before the Wright brothers flew their first plane. Nobody was flying to Orlando International Airport in those days. And it was 39 years before the 18th Amendment giving the right to vote. Just put that in perspective. This church was here. And so for 143 years, I just want you to think about the things that have happened in the world and how that has affected this church, but other churches and institutions as well. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Spanish flu and COVID, space flight, modern technology, the civil rights movement, LGBTQ plus rights, I-4, however you feel about I-4, in plumbing, artificial intelligence. I could go on and on. As I mentioned, Orlando in 18 had 1,660 people. Today, Greater Orlando's population is, anybody know? 2.7 million. And so as the community has grown, as times have changed, so this church has grown and this church has changed, just as so many other things have in our community. In 1913, we replaced the old clapboard church with a yellow brick church that was right across the street. Anybody remember that church? If you do, my mom was a bridesmaid and a wedding in that church. Many of our members still remember growing up in that church. That church was built in 1913 for the high price of $50,000. It's hard to get things repaired now for $50,000. Trust me, we talk about that a lot. I want you to think for a minute about the growth of our community. I tried to find what the population was in 1945 at the end of World War II, and that isn't available. But in 1950, there were 75,000 people in Orlando. 1950. A decade later, the population had grown to 203,000 people. We had more than doubled in one decade. And then by 1970, 310,000 people. And then the growth just kept happening. It has been a place of exponential growth. And of course, with the close of World War II and the big came lots of prosperity, including here in Orlando. This is an old postcard from Orlando. There was attracting people. Come to Orlando. It's a great place for great weather, a great place to have vacations, and a great opportunity for business, especially if you like oranges. Right? Citrus was our primary business. But a major development came with the opening of 2 places. Martin Marietta in 1957, when they hired 2,700 employees, and Disney World in 1971, when they hired 6,000 employees. Any Martin Marietta folks? For Lockheed Martin. No Martin Marietta folks? My dad worked at Martin Marietta. My mom for a time worked at Martin Marietta. My grandmother worked for a time at Martin Marietta. My brother-in-law worked at Martin Marietta, and there's a whole bunch of folks in this church that worked at Martin Marietta. I remember going to Disney that first month they were open. I was young way back then. Anybody remember the opening? Yeah. Do you remember there was a time where you would get on I-4, and once you passed OBT going west, the next thing you saw was Disney. I remember as a child thinking that's the furthest place away there is. It's changed, hasn't it? It's all on past, all the way to 27, on to Lakeland, and so forth. All of that has changed. And by the way, lots of folks in our church are here because of Disney. And so, in the midst of all of that growth, we built a sanctuary. It was opened in 1963, began to work in the 1950s. It seats somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 people. I think people were smaller when it was built because I don't think you can put all in there now. But imagine that. A sanctuary of 1,400 people. I don't know if you've been in. I hope you will sometime. It's a gorgeous building. It was quite a vision that we need to have a place for people to gather large numbers to come and worship here, because that's what was happening in our community. Large people were coming and finding church homes. They were leaving places up north and needing to find a place in the community somewhere else, lower. This was a great time for our church. In 1950, Christian Century magazine, which is a major publication in the church world, named First United Methodist Church of Orlando one of the top great churches of the country, one of the top 10 great churches of the country. Our pastor during that time was Reverend Branscombe, who went on to be Bishop Branscombe. I'll tell you more about him in just a moment. He was named Methodist of the Year for the whole denomination while he was pastor here. We were the most giving United Methodist Church. We weren't United then, we were Methodist. The most giving missionary giving Methodist church in the denomination in that time. Half of our budget went to mission causes, both locally and afar. It was a great season. So I mentioned Bishop Blackburn. In that time of kind of greatness, flagship church of the denomination, in a row, 3 different senior pastors of this church went on to become bishops. This, you see the sign at the bottom, this is the Church of Bishops. That comes from an old publication I was looking at this week. If you go through our sanctuary to the back, to the lobby, we call it a narthex, these portraits are hanging of the bishops. And there was an expectation, if you were a senior pastor at this church, your next job would be bishop. Now, you got to do this, a big deal in the Methodist Church to become a bishop, get elected. Unfortunately, before you can see the Bishop Branscombe on the left, Pendergrass in the middle, who's responsible for the building of the sanctuary, followed by Bishop Blackburn. Following Bishop Blackburn, that was our last bishop. We haven't had another one. And when I've talked to some of the senior pastors who served after them, it was a bit of a source of shame not getting elected bishop out of this church. And that got imposed on them sometimes. Like, how come you didn't get elected bishop out of that church? A personal story, I left for seminary in August of 1990. And so my last Sunday, I was leaving as youth director, and they let me preach that day, risky thing to do. And at the end of the service, a member of the church took me by the arm and said, "Vance, come with me." And he walked me to the portraits, and he said, "We'll be looking forward to yours." He was very disappointed. that was not in my cards, but deep respect for those, of course. Anybody go to Florida Southern College? Anybody? There's a Bishop Branscombe Auditorium at Florida Southern College, named after Bishop Branscombe. I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that through the years, this church has had a deep commitment to this community. When I came to this church in 1989, my dates a little off. I had a hard time kind of researching this exactly, but there had become some pretty stringent rules regarding homeless persons downtown. You weren't allowed to feed the homeless persons. They weren't allowed to sleep most places. And this is before the Christians, rather the Coalition for the Homeless had been built. There really weren't sufficient shelter spaces for the number of homeless, as is the case today. And this church said the least we can do is allow a place for homeless persons to sleep at night. Our old building, there were covered walkways around all of the buildings. And so the conclusion of many meetings in the evenings, security guards with flashlights and literally hundreds of homeless persons would sleep on our property each night. When I was the youth director, that's what was happening here. It wasn't always easy. I had a gun pulled on me during that time, some other challenges. If I was here past that hour some nights, I'd have to knock on the door from the inside out so that I didn't hit somebody in the head who was sleeping. That was a challenging time, but I was proud of this church, and that shaped me in believing this is a church that churches should care about the plight of the least of these in the world. And this church has. We were part of the starting of the Coalition for the Homeless, largely led by a man named Fred Wood. Anybody know Fred? Yeah, an attorney in our community. He was instrumental in both leading our church to that action and also the starting of the Coalition for the Homeless. During that time, when the homeless were sleeping on our properties, the Sentinel did an article about us. And this was at odds with our local government. And the Orlando Sentinel said the First United Methodist Church was the soul of downtown, which is a pretty profound thing to say, I think. We also were one of the founding churches, along with the other downtown churches, of the Christian Service Center. I serve on the board now at the Christian Service Center very proudly. The Christian Service Center, many of you may know, started because the building of Disney required a lot of laborers who came to Orlando, and when the labor stopped, they were unemployed. And so many of them were coming to downtown churches seeking assistance. And so all of the downtown churches came together to create a committee to help serve that population. Now it's really more for the homeless population, but continue to be part of that. And then also iDignity. I see you clapping. That's great. iDignity is a great organization that helps people get IDs. You'd be amazed how hard it is to function in life without an ID. And Michael Dippy grew up in this church. Michael Dippy is the head of iDignity. So we're proud to have been part of those things. I just looked at my watch. You know what I'm using Pastor Ritz's watch? Nothing. Yeah. Another 30 minutes. I like that better. I'm going to try. You may know the story that across the street there was a building called the FIS building that we owned and used. But then the city, of course, wanted to build the Dr. Phillips Center, and so it was in negotiation with the city that we were able to sell that building and build this. So how this building came into existence was the city wanted that Dr. Phillips, which of course is a world-class theater. And that enabled us to build this with a dream of really being what we're doing here today. Part of the vision of this building was that we wanted to be, I've heard it described as being like a student union campus. We wanted to be a place that the community could gather. That wouldn't just be for us, but that all kinds of groups from the committee would. From the community would. So you're here, NA meets here a couple times a week. Last night, big concert related to the Come Out with Pride event this week. Homeless Services Network is here. We have groups through the church. Next week is going to be packed out with young musicians doing a 4-day event next week. That happens here all the time. I would say another major event for us was the Pulse nightclub shooting on June 12th, 2016, when 49 were killed, many more were injured. Of course, that impacted our community as a whole. Orlando is not the same because of that tragic event. But because so much of the community gathering happened on the green in front of Dr. Phillips, this gave this church an opportunity to open our doors so that people could use the restrooms, so that people could come get a drink of water or be comforted. We had a lot of folks who were volunteering then. I wasn't here then, but that was a major moment for our church. A community worship service was held within a week of that tragedy. Many of the funerals happened here. And each year on the anniversary of that event, we open our doors and the families and survivors gather here for a meal. It's an annual event. We have a 49 bells ceremony that we do in our sanctuary. Sometimes it's outside, sometimes in the sanctuary. But I would say that in recent years, nothing has impacted us as much. I think this church was shaped by that and a deep held belief that God loves all people. And you've probably seen some of our signage that all people need a place to be and to know that they're loved and accepted and affirmed. And that was largely shaped by that event in particular. So here we are. It's 2024. This church has been here 143 years. 143 years from now will be the year 2067. And the church we are today is very different than the church we were in 1881. The church we are today, by the way, is very different than the church we were in 1962 when the sanctuary was built. Church has changed. I mentioned the baby boom just this is a generalization, but it's more or less true. Just about every baby boom child was raised religiously. Just about everybody in this country, just about everybody, some connection to church. My generation was the next, Generation X, and about half of us were raised in church, about half. And now there's Generation Z and the millennials and so forth, and people are calling them the nuns and the duns. That means they either have no church background, or they're done with religion, institutional religion, right? It's another thing to be the church of the future. I mentioned earlier that largely the growth of this church, and there was radical growth happening here with all of the folks who are coming from other places. That drove the growth of this church, and by the way, every other church downtown. When you left First Methodist Church of Baltimore, what did you do when you moved to Orlando? You transferred your membership to First Methodist Church of Orlando. If you left First Presbyterian Church of Charlotte, what did you do when you moved to Orlando? You joined First Presbyterian Church of Orlando, and so forth and so on, right? But what happens when you don't attend First Baptist Church of Louisville or First Presbyterian Church of Charlotte or First Methodist Church of wherever, and you move to downtown Orlando? You don't transfer your membership because you don't have a church membership. That's the reality of increasingly we're dealing with. We grew easily as Orlando grew until we didn't. And so now we begin to ask that question: what does it look like to be a vibrant church serving Orlando in 2024, 2025, and hopefully in 2167? And just as we can't be or not the church we were in 1881, we're realizing we've got to be a different church if we're going to be around another 140 years. That's a little bit of our history. There's a lot more I could share, obviously, 140 some years, but I'll stop there. If anybody has any comments or questions or thoughts. The question is, what's the biggest challenge getting young adults to come to church? The biggest challenge is getting young adults to come to church. I think one is that it's not supported in the culture like it once was. There's not the expectation. We used to just take for granted, you grow up in church, you graduate, go to college, you get married, you have children. What do? You come to church, right? You get them baptized and you're back. It just isn't, that cultural emphasis isn't there anymore. Anecdotally, I was a campus minister at Florida State University for 11 years. I was there from 03 to 14. And right around 2011, we were growing. We had about 600 students every Sunday morning worship. I would have told you the future was bright with young adults coming to church. And then 2012 hit, and I had more students involved and fewer showing up. And we had a couple of Sundays where I'd be packed out, like to the rafters. And then the next week, nobody's there. Where'd everybody go? And then they'd show up again, and I'd say, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. What happened? I said, well, it's midterms. Right, well, we've been through midterms at FSU for a long time. Why isn't anybody coming? You know what happened? It was the first group that had grown up playing soccer on Sunday mornings. It was the first group that did travel sports on Sundays. And so they learn that it's normal to go to church when you can, when you're in town, when it's available. And once church just becomes available and convenient, then it's easy not to go, right? And there's lots of things available every weekend in Central Florida. So that's the challenge, I think, is making it how we make it a priority, which we're trying to figure out how do we shift from being just a Sunday morning church to a 7-day-a-week church, offering things that aren't just in that narrow time frame. So we just got they're gonna make you run. Next week. We're off lunch. Yeah, yeah. You work a half good. Scott.
Zach.
I am working off lunch.
I think that, thank you as well for the history. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
As we meet here. So I think that with culture is influenced a lot by family. Now there's the media, which is allowing people to disconnect from the nucleus family. So
yeah,
kind of a solution, but more of a question that might lead to the solution is how do you get more families to show up with their young kids to impact that future and kind of start that new wave? How do you incentivize families to come?
yeah, right. So by emphasizing that, we have emphasized children and youth ministry, trying to make sure that we're offering things that are important to families. The challenge is that there's lots of other opportunities in Central Florida. So it's how do we make this one a high priority? We had a member of the staff here when I first came. He said, your problem is your people have too much money. Have we ever been told that your problem is you have too much money? And he said, I go to a poor, we went to a church. He said, I go to a poor church. Everybody shows up because it's the best thing in town. He said, you people have too many options, right? Affluence breeds freedom to go do things.
Pastor history, Orlando discrimination started in 1948.
Yeah.
I came in 1978, and we had on the board at that time, I think 2 members of the board, Russell Reed, later on, Hugh Wallace came on, and they were from the businessmen's class, and they were pretty strong with us at that time. And we used to have our annual banquets here too. Not all of them, but some.
Yeah.
So that's added history.
Yeah, great connection. Good. That's it. Let me just end by saying, we're so thrilled that you all are here. We welcome presents every Thursday. My office is just above those doors. I hear you singing. I hear the bell. We're thrilled that you're here. You're a light in our week. And so know that you're welcome. I hope you consider this to be your home as well. And know that I'm here if I can ever serve you in any way. I'd be honored to do.
It's a unique, it's out of 1,500, there's about 1,500 of those, but anyway, thank you, thank you.
Okay, we got a lottery. What a lottery. Okay. The last 3 numbers are 382. 382. Danny.
My pleasure.
Okay, man.
It's about $300 if I win. Oh, nope, I took 2 cards, so I'll turn both on. Okay.
All right.
2 more chances next week. Oh,
Okay.
just as a point of information,
The Christian Sharing Center was ran for many, many years by Robert Stewart as a Unitarian. And obviously, the people who do the best now in town for the homeless is Captain Ken Chapman and the Salvation Army. Okay, now remember, next week, we are not here. We're on a field trip. And so we'll see you in 2 weeks. Please turn your telephones back on. Don't want you to miss any meetings or miss any phone calls. And Unitarians, if you follow me on the phone test. of the things we think, say, and do. We get to talk, to further our concern, will build your friendships, will be beneficial to our concern. Thank you, everyone.